안녕하세요.
The luxurious headquarters of Kang Group shone under the lights of Seoul, a symbol of power and wealth. On the top floor, Kang Ji-hoon, the young and feared CEO, was analyzing financial reports with a serious expression. His sharp gaze allowed no room for mistakes, and everyone in the company knew that working for him required absolute perfection. He was known as an unyielding leader whose priority was always the growth of the company. But that day, a small incident was about to change the course of his life. On the ground floor, Seo Yoon-ha hurriedly organized documents at the reception desk. A dedicated employee, she supported her family alone and dreamed of a better life. Her world was practical and simple, very different from the business elite who strutted through the hallways in impeccable suits and polished shoes. For Yoon-ha, working at Kang Group was both a blessing and a curse. The salary was good, but the environment was cold and demanding. However, when a stack of papers slipped from her hands and scattered across the lobby floor, everything changed. Ji-hoon, who was heading down for a meeting, stopped in front of the scene. His initially cold gaze observed Yoon-ha as she hurried to pick up the papers. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Employees glanced sideways, fearing the CEO's reaction, known for his intolerance of mistakes. When their gazes finally met, something unexpected happened. Ji-hoon hesitated. For a moment, he forgot the reports, the meetings, and even his own unrelenting demeanor. Those brown, large, expressive eyes held something he couldn't define. It was vulnerability, courage, and a slight fear. "Sorry, sir. I'll get this out of the way," Yoon-ha murmured, not daring to meet Ji-hoon's gaze for long, gathering the papers with trembling hands. He should have simply ignored her, gone on his way, and forgotten that moment. That's what any CEO would do. But, for some reason, he remained still, watching her. Something about Yoon-ha's determined expression and sincere gaze intrigued him. Without thinking, he bent down and picked up one of the fallen papers, handing it to her. The act, simple for anyone, seemed like an electric shock to the onlookers. CEO Kang Ji-hoon helping an employee? "Be more careful next time," he said, his voice controlled, but lacking the harsh tone he usually used with his staff. Yoon-ha blinked, surprised. The lobby, which had previously been murmuring quietly, was now in absolute silence. Ji-hoon noticed the discreet murmur of the onlookers and quickly returned to his usual posture, continuing on his way without looking back. But something inside him had already changed. Later in the break room, Yoon-ha was still trying to make sense of what had happened. Why did he help me? She wondered, remembering Ji-hoon's intense gaze. It was an expression that mixed curiosity and something else, something she couldn't decipher. Her co-workers, however, couldn't stop commenting on the incident. "Did you see that? The CEO would never help someone like that," one colleague said in astonishment. "That was surreal." "Maybe he was in a good mood," suggested another. Yoon-ha sighed, trying to push her colleague's words away. To her, it seemed like an insignificant moment that everyone was exaggerating. Still, her heart raced a little faster when she remembered Ji-hoon's expression. That night, in his luxurious penthouse, Ji-hoon found himself remembering the scene. What was it about her that made him stop? He was a man who always followed the rules, who never veered from his path. But that woman, an ordinary employee, made him break a pattern. He couldn't explain it, but one thing was certain. Seo Yoon-ha was now on his mind, and that was not something he could simply ignore. The following days passed quickly at Kang Group, but for Ji-hoon, something felt different. Despite his exhausting routine, his mind kept returning to that moment in the lobby. He tried to convince himself it was just a coincidence, a fleeting moment of curiosity with no meaning. But he couldn't forget Seo Yoon-ha's eyes. That morning, he was reviewing an important contract when his assistant, Park Do-yoon, entered the room with a tense expression. "Sir, about the merger with Hwang Industries, there's been an impasse. President Hwang wants to renegotiate the terms." Ji-hoon furrowed his brow. That meant another week of debates and strategies. He sighed, feeling a slight discomfort in his chest. From a young age, he had learned that business was a battlefield, and there was no room for distractions. But ironically, that was exactly what he had been feeling since meeting Yoon-ha. Meanwhile, in the administrative department, Yoon-ha tried to ignore the curious glances of her colleagues. The rumor about the CEO helping her was still circulating, and the unwanted attention made her uncomfortable. But her biggest concern was something else. A mistake in one of the reports she was supposed to review could cost her job. Taking a deep breath, she went up to the executive floor to deliver the correction. Standing in front of the imposing CEO's office door, she felt a chill down her spine. It wasn't common for employees at her level to interact directly with him, but there was no choice. "Excuse me, Mr. Kang, I brought the revision of the financial report for the quarter." Ji-hoon looked up from his desk. It was her. Yoon-ha's heart raced as he stared at her intently, as though trying to decipher something. Ji-hoon, in turn, was surprised to notice how the soft light of the office highlighted the delicate yet determined expression on the employee's face. "Leave it on the desk," he said, his voice neutral, but his eyes followed her with curiosity. Yoon-ha quickly nodded, placing the file on the spotless glass desk. Ji-hoon picked up the document, flipping through it for a moment. To his surprise, he noticed that she had found a mistake that his own financial directors had overlooked. "You reviewed this data by yourself?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Yoon-ha hesitated. "Yes, sir. The financial department passed the reports for review, and I noticed that some values didn't match. I thought it would be better to correct it before it caused any bigger problems." There was a moment of silence. Ji-hoon looked at her more analytically. He hadn't expected an administrative employee to have this level of attention to detail. "Well done." Yoon-ha blinked, surprised. She had expected a scolding or indifference, but Ji-hoon seemed genuinely impressed. "Keep it up. You may go." She bowed respectfully and left quickly without looking back. When the door closed, Ji-hoon found himself staring at the document again. A faint smile appeared on his lips. Seo Yoon-ha was not just any employee, and for the first time in years he felt an inexplicable desire to get to know her better. In the following days, Ji-hoon tried to keep his focus on work, but his mind kept wandering back to Seo Yoon-ha. He found himself watching the employee from a distance, discreetly noticing her dedication and the way she interacted with others. It was unusual for him to be interested in someone outside of the business circle, but something about her intrigued him. She was different. Yoon-ha, on the other hand, tried to ignore the discreet glances from the CEO. The idea that he could be interested in her seemed absurd. Men like Kang Ji-hoon didn't get involved with ordinary employees, but every time their eyes met, a chill ran down her spine, and she felt that something was changing between them. The proof came on a rainy night. The company had let employees leave early due to the bad weather, but Yoon-ha stayed behind to finish an overdue report. When she finally left, the rain was pouring down on the streets of Seoul. Her umbrella had broken, and she was preparing to run to the subway when a black luxury car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down slowly, revealing Ji-hoon behind the wheel. "Get in. I'll take you home." Yoon-ha's eyes widened. "Mr. Kang, you don't have to. I can take the subway." Yoon-ha. He pronounced her name for the first time, and something in the way he said it made her heart race. "Get in the car, it's raining heavily." Not knowing how to refuse, she got in, feeling his sophisticated scent and the intense atmosphere of the car. Ji-hoon drove in silence for a few minutes before breaking the ice. "Do you always work so late?" "Only when necessary. I like to do my job well." Ji-hoon smiled faintly. "That's rare these days." Yoon-ha didn't know how to respond, so she turned her gaze to the rain hitting the window. He was more human than she had imagined. And in that car, far from the corporate environment, Ji-hoon didn't seem like the untouchable CEO. He just seemed like a man. When they arrived at the modest building where she lived, Ji-hoon extended a business card. "If you need anything, call me." She hesitated before taking the card. "Thank you, Mr. Kang." "Ji-hoon." He corrected her with a meaningful look. Yoon-ha felt her face flush and quickly exited the car, her heart pounding. As Ji-hoon drove away, she looked at the card in her hands. Something new was happening. And, for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, what if? In the days that followed, Ji-hoon and Yoon-ha tried to maintain appearances at the office. But no matter how hard they tried to act professionally, the tension between them was undeniable. Ji-hoon found himself making excuses to call her to his office, just to hear her voice. Yunha, on the other hand, felt her heart race every time their eyes met, unable to ignore the change in the atmosphere between them. What they both feared happened sooner than they expected. During a business dinner with shareholders of Kang Group, Ji-hoon's mother, Kang Soo-min, noticed that her son seemed more distracted than usual. Always imposing and perceptive, she waited for the right moment to approach him. "Ji-hoon, my son, I've heard rumors about you giving special attention to an employee. Is that true?" Her voice was cold but laced with intent. Ji-hoon, without changing his expression, placed his chopsticks on the table and looked directly at his mother. "I didn't know my personal life was being monitored like a quarterly report." Soo-min smiled without humor. "Your life is not just yours, Ji-hoon. You are the future of this company. You need to make the right choices. An employee? Do you know what that could cause? The shareholders wouldn't accept it. I take care of the shareholders. And what about your engagement with Min Seo-yeon?" The mention of the arranged engagement made something inside Ji-hoon twist. He had always known that his mother and the shareholders expected him to marry Seo-yeon, the daughter of one of the most influential families in Korea. But he had never intended to go down that path. "I never accepted that engagement, and I never will." Soo-min's expression hardened. "Be careful with your choices, Ji-hoon." Meanwhile, at the office, Yunha felt her chest tighten as she overheard whispers in the hallways. Everyone was talking about the possibility of Ji-hoon being involved with an employee, and she wasn't naive enough not to realize that all the attention was on her. At the end of the workday, an envelope with no sender was on her desk. With trembling fingers, she opened it and found a single sheet inside, a photo of Ji-hoon and Seo-yeon together at an event, with a message written beneath it. "This is the man you are fooling yourself over. Give up while you still can." Her heart seemed to drop. Perhaps she was making a mistake by allowing herself to dream. But before she could process it fully, her phone buzzed. A message from Ji-hoon. "Let's meet after work. I need to see you." Yunha took a deep breath. She needed answers, and for the first time, she was willing to face whatever came next. Yunha waited for Ji-hoon in a discreet cafe in the center of Seoul. Her heart hammered in her chest, torn between hope and fear. The image from the photo was still vivid in her mind. She wanted to believe that Ji-hoon wasn't like the cold, wealthy men she had heard about all her life, but the reality could be cruel. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, but Yunha could barely taste the drink in front of her. Her hands were cold, and she tapped her fingers against the porcelain cup, lost in thought. If all of this was true, if Ji-hoon really was engaged, then she had been naive to believe that there could be something between them. She had never wanted to get involved in something that could hurt them both. Ji-hoon arrived hurriedly, his expression heavy. As soon as he saw her, he relaxed his shoulders and let out a relieved sigh. His dark suit contrasted with the cozy atmosphere of the cafe, but his presence was undeniable. He wasn't just the cold, calculating CEO everyone knew. At that moment, he seemed like a man struggling against something much larger than himself. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting down across from her. "I needed to talk to you." Yunha lifted her eyes, looking at him firmly. Her chest was heavy with doubt and fear of what he would say. "Before anything, I need to know." She pulled the photo from the envelope and placed it on the table. "Is this true? Are you engaged?" Ji-hoon looked at the photo and clenched his jaw. He picked up the paper between his fingers and slowly crumpled it, throwing it onto the table. I've never been engaged to Seo-yeon." His voice was firm, but laced with frustration. "This is just what my mother and the shareholders want. I've never agreed to this marriage." Yunha studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of a lie, but all she found was sincerity. Still, that didn't mean the path was clear for them. "It doesn't matter whether you agreed or not. They will keep pressuring you, and you know that." Ji-hoon ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that showed his exhaustion. He wasn't just facing his family, he was also facing himself. His whole life he had followed rules, walked the expected path, but now, for the first time, he wanted something that wasn't part of the plan. "I know, but that doesn't change what I want. I want you, Yunha, and I will fight for that." Her heart skipped a beat, but reality crashed down on her like a storm. And what happens afterward? Her voice came out quieter. "Your family will never accept me. The shareholders will never allow it. And if you insist, you could lose everything." Ji-hoon held her hand over the table, not caring if anyone saw. The touch was warm, firm, and made Yoon-ha hold her breath. "If losing everything means having you, then I'm not losing anything." His words hit her like a whirlwind. Fear kept her from responding immediately, but hope shone in her eyes. Before she could react, Ji-hoon leaned a little closer and whispered, "Give me a chance. Trust me." Yoon-ha wanted to fight against it, wanted to protect herself, but at that moment, she realized it was already too late. Her heart already belonged to Kang Ji-hoon. The sound of a door opening in the cafe made Yoon-ha turn, and her body tensed. Seon-yeon entered, accompanied by 2 bodyguards, and her eyes went straight to Ji-hoon. A cold smile formed on her lips before she approached. Well, what a surprise to find you here, Ji-hoon." Her voice was sweet, but there was poison in every word. "And with company. Interesting." Yoon-ha felt a shiver run up her spine, but refused to look away. She knew this moment would come, and now she was ready to face it. The silence that followed was sharp. Seo-yeon kept her gaze fixed on Ji-hoon, but he did not look away from Yoon-ha. The cafe, once a discreet refuge, now felt like an arena about to witness a confrontation. "Seo-yeon, what are you doing here?" Ji-hoon asked, his voice controlled, but laced with exasperation. Seo-yeon chuckled softly, crossing her arms. "I should be the one asking that. We were supposed to have dinner with your parents today, remember? But instead, you're here, with her." She cast a sharp glance at Yoon-ha, who stood firm, though she could feel the tension mounting. Ji-hoon sighed, tired of his family's manipulations. "I never agreed to this dinner, Seon. You know that." She narrowed her eyes, but soon her expression softened into a calculated smile. "You think you can escape, Ji-hoon? You know what's going to happen if you keep insisting on this madness, don't you?" Yoon-ha felt Ji-hoon's grip on her hand tighten. She knew he was facing a difficult choice. But then, to her surprise, he stood up, still holding her hand, and faced Seo-yeon without hesitation. "I've made my decision. I'm not a puppet of my family. I'll give up everything if I have to, but I won't give up on Yoon-ha." The cafe fell silent. Seo-yeon watched him, surprised by the determination he had never shown before. For a moment it seemed like she wanted to argue, but in the end, she huffed and took a step back. "Then, so be it. But don't say I didn't warn you." With one last glance at Yoon-ha, she turned and walked out of the cafe, her heels echoing on the floor. Yoon-ha looked at Ji-hoon, surprised. "Are you sure about this? There's no turning back after this decision." Ji-hoon smiled, raising her hand to his lips and placing a gentle kiss. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Months later, the event hall of the most luxurious hotel in Seoul was filled with white flowers and glowing candles. Ji-hoon and Yoon-ha's wedding was one of the most talked about events of the year, but not for the glamour, rather for the story that had led to this moment. Ji-hoon's family, initially resistant, slowly realized they could not fight against true love. His father, still reluctant, watched the ceremony from a distance, but his mother, moved, held her son's hand, and whispered, "Be happy," before the ceremony began. Yoon-ha walked down the aisle in a flawless white dress, her eyes shining as she met Ji-hoon at the altar, the man who had been willing to face the world for her. When the vows were exchanged, Ji-hoon held her hands and said, "Nothing has ever felt as right to me as you. I promise that, no matter what happens, I will never let go of your hand." Yoon-ha smiled, feeling the tears threatening to fall, "And I promise that, no matter what the future holds, I will always be by your side." The kiss that sealed their union was met with applause, but for them, nothing mattered more than the silent promise they made to each other. Ji-hoon and Yoon-ha proved that true love knows no barriers. And so, they began their new life together, ready to build a future based not on others' expectations, but on the feeling that had brought them together from the very first day.